Going to do a little bit more of our science work. The last few weeks we've been studying the systems of the human body, and we've been using our textbook to do that. So you've heard about a bunch of different systems, and these systems are different parts of our body that kind of work together to allow us to live, right? So we kind of separate them into different systems so that we can think about them and talk about them, but really they're all working together to keep your body moving. And I think it's kind of interesting that we've been talking about this in the middle of this coronavirus because it makes it more important than ever for us to really understand what's going on in our body and how our bodies work. So, with that, let's talk and just do a quick review of some of those before we get into this week's lesson, which is more focused on the brain. So, we can talk first about the musculoskeletal system. Now, that's the one that includes your muscles, your bones, and your cartilage, and it basically gives your body a form or a shape. Because if you didn't have muscles and bones, you would just kind of be a blob lying on the ground. And they allow you to move, right? If you didn't have bones, it'd be much harder to move. You can think, for example, of other species, like a snail, for example, that have a very different musculoskeletal system than we do, right? Like they have their exoskeleton of their shell, but inside is just kind of this like blob of flesh. So their system works very differently than ours. On the other hand, a bird is actually a little more similar to us, right? Because it has all those bones moving around on the inside, and then muscles that kind of are linked into those bones. The next system we talked about was the digestive system. And these are all the parts of the body that kind of work together to break down or digest your food to the nutrients so that your body can absorb them. And your teacher has forgotten to write that last word. 1, 2, 3. Oh, yeah. It includes your mouth, stomach, intestines, and rectum. So the idea there is like that you take in food and you take in water, and your body has to process those so that they can go into the various cells in your body and kind of get you moving and living and surviving. And so there has to be a system that kind of breaks all that down, and that's your digestive system. And then once it's done breaking it down and taking out the good stuff, it has to excrete or get rid of the waste, through pooing or peeing, right? And that's the rectum. Next system that we talked about was the circulatory system. And this is a system that carries things through the body, including nutrients, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. So this includes the heart, the veins, the arteries, and just blood. So this is kind of like the highway of your body. It carries things around, and it carries things around to keep your cells going, because none of the cells in your body are going to survive without oxygen. And after a while, once they're done with using that oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide, and that's a gas that, if we have too much of it in our system, it'll kill us, right? That's just the way that we work. So what it does is it takes that carbon dioxide out of each cell in our body, and it kind of pumps it all the way back up to your lungs, and then your lungs breathe it out. And on the topic of breathing, that brings me to the respiratory system. And so this is a system that breathes, and it takes in oxygen from our surrounding environment, and it takes out carbon dioxide. So once our cells are done with the oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide, and we breathe that out. And it includes the nose, the esophagus, and the lungs. For all of these, I'm only saying a few quick things about them just as a review, and just a few parts of them, because each of these systems is extremely complex. And as I said, we divide them into these different systems, but each of them actually is working together with the others. And they say there's 11 body systems in total, so we're talking about 5 in grade 5. But wait, Mr. Formosa, we've only talked about 4 so far. Well, the one we're going to talk about today is the nervous system. So we're going to talk about the nervous system, the most important part of which is the brain. So your nervous system is basically how you feel things and how your body kind of sends messages to control every other part of your body. And the really important piece there is your brain. So your brain is your body's command center. It's like the headquarters. And it controls all the other things that your body does. It coordinates, it plans out and it puts together all the activities of all the other body systems. So your brain is extremely, extremely important. Like if you were to think of, places that if you were to hurt them, you could still survive. Like if somebody cut off your finger, that would be unpleasant. That would be unfortunate. I don't recommend anyone do it. But you would likely still survive as long as you didn't breathe out. If somebody cut off part of your brain, it would be considerably more difficult for you to survive. If your part of your finger was shot off, you'd probably survive. If part of your brain is shot off, you're in real trouble because that's where all of the other functions of your body are kind of coordinated. I think that was kind of a morbid or kind of a weird note to start off on, but my point is just the brain is really important. So that's what we're going to be talking about this week in this video science lesson. So from here on in, I'm going to be talking about a bunch of subjects connected to the brain and kind of how it works and why the human brain is so different and like how it connects to our emotions and all that sort of thing. And this is where you're going to start filling in the blanks on some of these notes, okay? So we'll start off by talking about evolution and how kind of we as a species, as human beings, kind of came to be. So human beings are animals. We are related to all other animals. Our earliest ancestors evolved over many generations through a process known as natural selection. So if you go, step in your time machine and go back a few billion years, you'll find that the Earth, you've got Pangaea, you've got all these the ocean, you've got all these tectonic plates moving around, and what you also have is a bunch of single-celled organisms. And what that means is you've got like little cells that are just kind of living on their own. And eventually those little cells somehow from generation to generation to generation to generation to generation changed, they evolved to become who we are today, human beings, right? And this is happening over billions of years. And the process is known as natural selection. Now this means that if something was different about one organism and it helped that organism to survive, then that organism was likely to have more offspring. So if you can think of something that would give you an advantage, or not give you, but give your children an advantage, if that just kind of happened as there was reproduction, then the one that had the advantage, the one that had the extra good thing, would have more children. And then you expand that from generation to generation to generation to generation. And over time, what this led to is our development as a uniquely rational species. Now, rational, kind of a big fancy word, but it basically just means that we're able to think creatively, develop technology, create culture and art. And if you think of other species of animals in the world, we're really the only one that does that, right? Like there's other species that are really impressive. Like it looks like octopi, or octopuses rather, are able to kind of figure out how to work puzzles. There's some chimpanzees that really seem to be a little complex. Pigs are actually quite smart. Interestingly, owls are not very smart, despite the fact that we see them as a symbol of wisdom, which is another kind of smart animal. In a sense, bees and wasps are quite smart because they work in kind of those colonies, but nothing really approaches where we are as human beings in terms of kind of what we can think of, what we can do, what we can develop, and what we've created. So we're really kind of this unique species, and we were produced, just like every other animal though, through this process of evolution. Now, I know what I said was a little confusing there, so I'm going to invite you just to fill in these blanks, and then I'm going to show you this video, which I think is going to kind of explain some of these facts pretty well as well.
Okay, go to the window, or better yet, step outside. A squirrel darts past. Trees and weeds surge up towards the sky. Birds tickle the air. Get down on the ground and there's more. Worms wriggling, mushrooms sprouting, beetles crawling. There's stuff you can't even see, like bacteria. And everywhere you go on this planet, on land, underground, in the air, and in the water, there's more life to be found. And all of it, even you, is shaped by the most incredible of forces, evolution.
Evolution essentially multiplies majesty by majesty by majesty.
And our understanding of all that majesty, it goes back to the mid-1800s when an English 20-something, a guy named Charles Darwin, got an invitation he couldn't refuse.
To travel around the world. It was 5 years, and that voyage made him into a thinker.
He was just a great naturalist. He saw things out in nature, and he asked why.
As in, why is there such a stunning diversity of life? Why are similar-looking species sometimes located on opposite sides of the planet? It was Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace who independently puzzled out a mechanism behind evolution.
Which was natural selection.
Natural selection just means that nature, the natural environment, is what's selecting which organisms survive long enough to reproduce, and it depends on two key ingredients: The first is some way of getting features or traits to be inherited from one generation to the next, which usually means reproduction. The second is variation. If organisms were to make exact duplicates of themselves every time they reproduced, nothing would change. There'd be no elephants, no pine trees, no humans. We'd still just be single-celled proto-organisms. Now, the environment can't support every individual that's born. Maybe it's too dry or too wet for some of them. Maybe all the food's up in tall trees. Maybe there's not enough food. Or maybe it's just really cold. Whatever it is, organisms compete for resources. And this is where selection comes in. For instance, scientists believe that a few 100,000 years ago, before there were polar bears, some brown bears got stranded in the Arctic. The few that survived likely had fur coats that were a bit thicker and lighter in color than the others. That would have kept them warmer and helped them blend in with the snow to sneak up on prey more easily. The point is, not all variations make it.
And the things that survive go on to reproduce.
In other words, survival of the fittest, which doesn't necessarily mean the biggest or the strongest.
Fittest, in an evolutionary sense, is whoever has the most descendants.
In the Arctic, the bears with thicker and whiter coats survived more often and had more offspring that inherited the thicker and whiter fur. And gradually, other changes accumulated too, until this population became a separate species from the brown bears. However, if we were to swap out the snow for a forest, having polar bear-like fur would likely be a bad thing. In other words, evolution doesn't progress in one fixed direction, but it's not entirely random either. With so many environments selecting for all kinds of traits, evolution has resulted in the countless species that have lived on Earth. Now, Darwin wrote these ideas down.
He was not a visual man.
So when he did bother to draw something, people took notice, like this image he sketched in one of his notebooks.
It's a tree.
And it tells us how things are related. That is, they all can be traced back to a common ancestor.
That ancestor, the first living organism on our planet, is at the base of the tree trunk. Here's another view of this so-called phylogenetic tree. As life's evolved over the last 3.8 billion years, new species have branched off, leading to entire lineages of different organisms.
Every branching point in that tree is a story.
Stories of global domination, of extinction, stories of beauty, and of remarkable adaptation to an ever-changing world.
I mean, the goal of the Tree of Life is try to understand how every species is related to each other. The breadth of this, that is amazing.
And that's where you come in. In Nova's Evolution Lab, you'll be climbing around the Tree of Life to build out portions of that tree, to see how evolution really works and understand why it matters to you. Like, did you eat a dinosaur last night for dinner? Can you save someone from a venomous snake bite? Or do you have a Neanderthal ancestor? Play this lab. Build the Tree of Life, which is your family tree, and discover just how connected you are to everything that's alive and everything that's ever lived.
So it's kind of incredible, just to kind of learn a bit about where we come from, right? And how kind of our species came to be, and how you came to be the way that you are. Now, if you don't understand this completely, that's okay. Honestly, I don't think I fully understood it until high school. But the key kind of idea is just that our body, who we are and our bodies were created kind of through this long process that basically meant that if you were in some way better off in terms of making more children, then there would be more of you from generation to generation. And that kind of produced all the species that are around today. And so that's kind of the key thing there. So let's go on to the next part of our discussion. So I'm just going to show you some images here. This is an image you may have seen or something like this, which talks about how, it's not like this happened all at once. This is happening over millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years, where we kind of move from, if I was to take this back further and further, down here somewhere, there'd be like a little itsy bitsy kind of single-celled organism, and over billions of years that changed us from species to species until we are where we are today, Homo sapiens, human beings. Now I love this picture because it's kind of an interesting idea. This is a famous painting, or this is a little kind of different version of a famous painting called God and Man which you can find at the Vatican in Rome. And so on the right, you've got God, and he's kind of pointing out towards man, towards human beings. And so, as a Christian, one of the things I believe is that God kind of guided this process, particularly for humans, and that at a certain point in that process that he kind of breathed that spark of human dignity into us, right? That he made us in his image and likeness, and that he gave us kind of these souls that are rational, and that's part of what he did for kind of us as human beings. And I think sometimes we've got this idea that the story of the creation is supposed to be a science textbook. But one of the things that our faith teaches us is that it's not really a science textbook in the sense that this is exactly how human beings were made. It's supposed to tell us the deep truth of what it means to be a human being, about who we are, and also about who God is, someone who loves us and who made us, and in whose image we are made. So I don't want you to get those two things confused, right? Because there's a scientific explanation, but it doesn't go against what we believe in our faith about how God made us. So let's start filling in some notes. Christians believe God guided this evolution for humans, which includes making us in his image and likeness. Now, all animals have a brain, but not every brain is the same. So if you think about, the brain of a rat and your brain, I can guarantee you, every single student in this class, every single person you know, is smarter than a rat. Your brain is different. In fact, the human brain is, in my view, a miracle. It is more powerful than a supercomputer, and it has allowed human beings to do things no other animal can do. Now your brain, that thing up there, your noggin right up there in your skull, is made up of billions, not millions, billions. That's 9 zeros. Billions of cells called neurons. Our thoughts and ideas and feelings start in the brain through electrical charges sent between and through each neuron. So there's enough electricity in your brain right now to power a light bulb, because it's sending these little charges back between these cells in your mind, and that's kind of what thinking is. It's these little charges moving through these parts of your brain. And it's kind of neat, right? Even neuroscientists, even the people that study the brain, still don't really understand exactly how it works. But we know some things about the brain. So here's a diagram of the brain, and I looked at your notes, and I think something went wrong with this photocopier, because on your diagram you can see the cerebrum, the cerebellum, but you can't see the brainstem. So what I'd like you to do is, first things first, can you just pause this video and draw in the brainstem, and then label these 3 parts. Now the parts are the brainstem, which is this kind of narrow piece in the bottom that connects to the back where your spine is. There is the cerebellum, which is almost like this round ovalish thing at the kind of base of your brain, right kind of near the back of your neck, above like the very top back of your neck. And then there's the cerebrum, which is kind of the entire top part of your brain, the entire top. It includes like the front of your brain, which is actually the kind of most human part of your brain where all your kind of complex thinking happens, but also the back of your brain and the top of your brain. So the cerebrum is kind of the whole top layer of your brain. And we as human beings, we've got pretty big brains relative to most species, and there's a lot going on in them. And you think about how important they are to our bodies, well, we have this bone all around our brain surrounding it so it stays safe. It's called the skull, right? And the idea there, it's like how when you're biking you wear a helmet. It's like a built-in helmet in case you're dumb enough not to wear a bike helmet. And we've got that because our bodies are designed, through evolution and through this process so that we are able to kind of, survive. And having a big, hard thing around your head keeps you safe. Keeps your brain safe. So please take a moment, label these 3 parts here. Now what I want to talk about now is let's look at these different kind of parts of the brain. Okay. So let's start off with the lizard brain. So that's the red part at the bottom. It includes the brainstem and the cerebellum. This ancient brain is all about survival. When danger appears, it decides whether to fight or flee. So if you look at the brain of a lizard, it has the cerebellum and it has the brainstem, but it doesn't have the other parts. Then there's kind of this middle part. It's called the mouse brain. An extra layer of brain provides more memory and a wider range of emotions. That allows mammals to do things like learn from their experiences and anticipate danger, rather than merely reacting to it. So your average mouse is smarter than your average lizard, And what we can do is that they've got this kind of ability to remember things, right? Mice can remember, where the crumbs are. Mice can remember, oh no, if I see that person with the broom, I'm in trouble. So they've got kind of a little more than the lizard has. And then the human brain is with 100 billion cells and 500 trillion connections. I believe trillion is 12 zeros, so 500 trillion. This part of the brain allows us to solve difficult problems and navigate a very complex social world. It's also responsible for imagination, culture, and the ability to figure out what other people are thinking based on social cues. So the idea is that there's different parts of the brain, and some of them are parts that other animals also have. So lizards have that little kind of cerebellum in the brainstem. It's kind of fight or flight. It's all about danger, survival. Mice have this kind of middle section with kind of a bit of memory and some emotions. And then we are the only species with this kind of huge human brain, this extra layer that allows us to do all this kind of complex stuff. So I have this question for you. When you are stressed out, what part of your brain do you think you're thinking from? You know, when you're like really annoyed at somebody or something's going poorly for you, what part of your brain do you think you're thinking from? Well, I'll give you a hint. Let's watch this little video here from National Geographic. This is pretty awesome.
Some young Costa Rican basilisk lizards are looking for food. Basilisks have been nicknamed the Jesus Christ lizard. Why? This adult male, probably the father of the young lizards, can't tell us. Nor can this female, exclusive property of the territorial male. It has nothing to do with the feeding habits of the basilisk, which consists primarily of insects and berries. This predatory reptile will help reveal the secret as it stalks the young basilisk. The basilisk is called the Jesus Christ lizard because it can walk, well, really run on water. It bicycles its hind legs, and the tail becomes a counterweight. We can't know what the snake is thinking. Did it really want to eat the lizard, or did it just want to show?
So if you think about kind of the question up there, I love this video because this Jesus Christ lizard is such an interesting kind of lizard, just because it's got this ability, which, if you think about it from natural selection, probably means that it's able to survive pretty well in the jungle where it's kind of having to deal with all these snakes. But in that lizard's brain, it senses danger, run. That's all that's going on in there, right? It's not like, maybe I should go out for lunch with my friend Sally. It doesn't have those abilities. It sees, snake, danger, run, go. Or, the alternative, I guess, could be, snake, danger, bite. The trouble there is that it's a little lizard, so it's probably better for it to run away. So we'll go ahead here to this next one. Okay, so the human brain has several parts. Each part of the brain is related, but they have separate focuses too. Our brainstem and cerebellum are sometimes called our, quote, lizard brain, because they are the parts of our brains that our reptile cousins also have. These parts of our brain, Mr. Formosa got a mistake here, grammar-wise. 1, 2, 3. Oh, yeah. These parts of our brain help to guide how we respond to danger. When we feel negative emotions like fear, anger, and stress, our bodies release chemicals such as cortisol that help us respond to danger. So when you feel like you're in danger of something, your body, that little brainstem part, the brainstem and cerebellum, the lizard brain, are like, okay, we are going to pump some chemicals into your body to help you respond to that danger. When you feel freaked out, it's going to send some of these chemicals into your body to help you respond. So cortisol is a good example of one of those chemicals. And basically, it gets released, and what it does, it makes your pupils, parts of your eyes, expand so they get bigger to help you see better. It encourages you to speed up your breathing to help your muscles work faster. Your heart starts beating faster to help your muscles work faster. And your muscles tense. like they get tighter to help you respond to the threat. And we call these fight or flight responses. And flight means kind of running away in this context. So the idea there is, if you can imagine, like maybe you wrote a test and you weren't really prepared for it. You might have felt beforehand that your heart was like beating, like bum 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 bum, or even at speed charts, right? Because that's your body, and what it's doing is it's actually saying, there is danger, I'm afraid of something, there is a snake that's going to chase me down, so I have to run across the water. You're doing the same thing that a lizard would do, and your heart is beating faster because you're feeling scared. Now, the deal is that if you don't say your poem correctly, I am not going to eat you or chase you down or anything like that. I'm going to pat you on the back and say, we'll try again. But our bodies, aren't built for that kind of thing. They're built to kind of save us from whatever it is that's chasing us down. You think about our ancestors who, dealt with mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and all this kind of thing. So our bodies aren't really built for like speech arts. They're built for how can I survive being chased by a tiger? And that's where kind of cortisol and these other stress hormones are really helpful. So if you look at this lady, you can see a great example of cortisol and how it's affecting her. And I think the big one is, well, you say it, and then I'll come to it. But basically, I think the first one is her eyes, right? You can see her eyes, her pupils are really big. They've kind of dilated, they've gotten bigger, so she can see better. And the other thing is she's kind of moved exactly into this defensive position so that if something's coming at her, I don't know, maybe she's scared of like a snake or she's scared of something, she's like all kind of pulled back, ready to go, and her muscles are really tense, right? So if she needed to run, she could do that really quick. If she needed to punch, she could do that really quick. And that's because in her body, this extra stress hormone called cortisol is being released by the part of her brain that we call the lizard brain. Okay, this is amazing. There's a little child here, and I want to show you part of what's going on in his mind, and I think mostly in his lizard brain. No! Grade 5, this is tragic. Oh my goodness. So they've taken it down. So basically it was a video of a little kid who he wasn't able to get an ice cream. And so he started pulling off his jacket and saying, I'm going to fight you. I'm going to fight you. And he was getting really mad and he was stomping his feet. And the deal with it was that, he was mad. So he had all these like emotional reactions coming out of this stress hormone being released to help him fight. Well, that's sad. Okay, so we'll continue here though. You know what? Actually, I'm going to pause this recording and I'm going to go see if I can. Pleasure, I figured it out. So, I mean, the key point here is that this poor little boy here is being stressed out because the guy's playing tricks on him, and all these stress hormones are being released into his body, this cortisol, and he's like getting ready to fight or to run away, just in the same way that, a bear would, right? Like we've got the same things pumping through us in order to kind of deal with these stressful emotions, the same things that kind of a lizard would have. So now we're going to talk about controlling our emotions and kind of how that works. And I think what I'm going to do is switch around the space that we're looking at. So, however, usually the right answer to negative emotions is not to run away or fight someone. We want to make better and more rational decisions. Now, to do this, what we need to do is we need to be able to control or kind of discipline ourselves so that we make decisions using your cerebrum, the part that we call the human brain. This is where our good thinking happens. So if we're going to go back up here, all the way up here. So we remember that this red part here is kind of the lizard brain. That's making decisions when we get really stressed out. This orange part is kind of the human brain. And that's the part making decisions when we're thinking clearly and kind of rationally. So we want to do that, right? So how do we do it? How do we control our emotions so that we're able to kind of be at a better kind of position? Whoops, that's not really helpful. Okay, so let's watch this little video here. I think this is kind of helpful. So I think that that's kind of a beautiful story, and it kind of illustrates the point about how our brain works, right? That guy hadn't been paid, and he'd been working, and he was really stressed out about that. And I think, fair enough, right? And so he was about to act in a kind of really crazy way, right? He was about, he had a knife out, he went to a police station, he was being super crazy. But that's because the part of his body that was thinking was the lizard brain. And then eventually the other guy was able to listen to him and kind of support him and help him, the cop, the police officer. And as a result, the guy was able to kind of cool down, get control, and the way he got control is he moved from his lizard brain up to his human brain. And that's something that we all kind of want to do, right? Is move away from that lizard brain and into our human brain. Whoops. Let's get to this next one here. Okay, so usually the right answer to negative emotions is not to run away, right? You're humans. So you don't usually want to run away from something or fight with somebody, right? Like that's usually not the most helpful way to deal with kind of negative things in your life. We want to make better, more rational decisions. And to do this, I think we already said this. Whoopsie daisies. Okay, I'm going to keep going. But to do this, you need to control or discipline yourself. So you make decisions using your cerebrum, the human brain, and this is where our good thinking happens. So one thing to think about is one strategy is to help you pause. To help with that is to pause for a few minutes and calm down when you feel stressed. So, for example, if you're feeling stressed, you can. What could you do? Well, the whole idea is to pause, right? So you calm down if you're feeling stressed. So you're really upset with somebody. Your parent just got mad at you for something, and you're about to get mad at them. Or your friend kind of said something rude to you, and you're about to say something rude back. Or you just lost a game that you were really hoping to win. So what can we do? Well, one thing is, if you're stressed, what you can do is you can take a break from what you're doing, and you can come up with your own ideas here. But that's, an option, right? So if you're stressed during a volleyball game, maybe say, Coach, I really need a minute on the side, right? You can pause to breathe. You would say, okay, I'm going to take 10 deep breaths, or I'm going to take 5 deep breaths. Or, I think another one that you can do is that you can say a quick prayer. Because by doing that, what you're doing is you're kind of, again, saying that you're a human being, right? You're going to control things with your human brain. You're going to pray up to God, the God who made you as a human. So these are all different ways that, when we're stressed, we can kind of control that, and we can kind of live a better way. We can live from our human brain instead of our kind of like animal brain. So I'm going to go put those back to blank just so that I can use this again later. But these are all different options. Whoopsie daisies. And we'll go back to our next slide. So another strategy that I like to use is that, if you're upset or worried about something, ask yourself if it will matter to you in 5 years. You guys are 10 years old. But I want you to think say that you got in a little fight with your sibling this morning. Will you remember it 5 years from now? I can guarantee you, no, you won't. I remember one fight I had with my brothers, and I had a lot of fight with my brothers because we were, about the same age and brothers, and we were always fighting. I remember one of them from the entire time that I was a kid. They don't, they're not really important. They don't matter to you in 5 years. So we can kind of brush them off when you say, this is not the biggest deal in the world, so I can kind of let it go. And what this helps us to do is to put our problems in perspective, and helps your human brain, instead of your lizard brain, make decisions, right? Because we can realize, fighting with my brother over the Game Boy is probably not that big a deal in the long run, right? So maybe I can just let him borrow the Game Boy for now. And I'm not saying be a pushover, but I'm saying that we just think about like what is kind of really important. And if you look at this image here, I just want you to think for a minute, what's happening in this story, right? Who is this guy? Who are these guys? Well, I mean, we can see pretty clearly that this is Christ, right? This is Jesus Christ over here. And you can see that he's got that halo around him. And if you look at his facial expression, it's quite calm. But if you look at the facial expression of the guy over here, his face is really, he's freaked out. And this is the story of St. Peter, who's walking out on water towards Jesus. And at first he's able to do it, right? He's looking at Jesus, he's walking out towards him. And then he starts to look down and look around, and he starts getting freaked out by the water. And then he starts to sink. And I think this is a beautiful story, not only for our faith, but also, I mean, this tells us something that we know about the brain, is that when we get freaked out by something, it really can hurt us. It can really hurt us. And so we want to calm down and be less afraid by some things. And in the Bible, the thing that Jesus says most often is, be not afraid. And that's what Jesus said to Peter when he was sinking into the water. He said, be not afraid, I am with you. And God made us as humans, right? He wants us to make choices from our human brain, not our lizard brain. And this is what it means to grow in wisdom and in knowledge. And we become more like God, more fitting who we're meant to be by acting rationally and using our brains, right? God didn't give you this beautiful brain just to go and have you act like a lizard. None of us in the class should be acting like lizards. We should all be trying to act like humans. So trying to make these wiser choices where we calm down and think through the things we do. And I love this one. I love this little cartoon just because it kind of is an image of what I'm talking about, is that this guy, he's in a tough situation and he's able to kind of control his mind. Now, in this case, he maybe took it too far, right? If you're in a burning building, use that cortisol, use that stress, use the fact that your muscles are tense to get out of there right away, and don't overthink it. But I think this is just kind of an example of, hey, we can use our brains to control kind of how we feel. We have that ability, which is kind of incredible. Okay, we're now going to shift from talking about kind of dealing with stress and all that to talking about learning, how you learn. So there's a phrase called neuroplasticity. I'm just going to count out the syllables there. Neuroplasticity. That's a 6-syllable word, grade 5. It's an important word though, and it teaches us it'll teach us a little bit about how thinking happens and how learning happens. Okay, so when you think, your brain makes and sends 1, 2, 3. Oh yeah. Your brain makes and sends electrical messages between neurons, so those are the brain cells, along what we call these kind of neural pathways. So you've got almost like little kind of connections in your brain we call pathways. Now, if you practice thinking enough, then your neural pathways become stronger, and you begin to think that way more easily. So you might think for a minute, how did you learn to read, right? So if you think just in a sense, right, like when you see the shape that I'm just about to make, like I just made that, and you look at that and you know that I made an A. But if you think about when you were 3 years old, you should have seen that and you'd been like, triangle. Like you wouldn't have known necessarily like what that meant. But now it's just natural that if you look at that, you immediately know, oh, that's an A, right? And that's because you have practiced reading so much, and you're going to continue practicing reading so much if I have my way. But you're going to practicing again and again and again means that it becomes natural for you. So we call this neuroplasticity. And the idea is that your brain is kind of like moldable plastic or Play-Doh, because as you learn things, it literally changes its structure. Now the thing is, as you get older, like my age, your parents' age, your brain becomes less plastic, and it becomes harder to learn new things. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but where you guys are at 10 years old and even younger is an amazing time for your brain because it can learn things like that. It's so much easier to learn how to read when you're 5 or 6 than it would be if we waited till you were 56, because your brain is really good at learning when you're that young. And in fact, that's how you learn how to speak an entirely new language, right? If you live in a house where mom speaks French and dad speaks English, you'll probably learn both French and English, which is just crazy. You'll just pick it up from your surroundings because your brain is growing so fast and learning so quick. So let's watch this video to kind of give us a little more information.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So that's kind of the idea there, is that our bodies and our brains are able to kind of move around and change as we get older, depending on, if we make something a habit, right? So if you make it a habit that every time you want to bite your nails, for example, that you kind of push your hand away, after enough time, you'll actually not bite your nails because you'll have changed kind of that behavior because you'll have rewired these neural pathways in your brain. Okay, so let's talk about happiness in the brain. So we talked about something called cortisol, which is this like stress chemical that our brain releases. But our brains also release chemicals like endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin when we do certain things. And these chemicals are part of what makes us feel happy, right? So when you feel happy, say someone said something really nice to you and you feel like you're 10 feet tall and your heart expands. What's actually happening scientifically is that these chemicals, your brain is going and it's releasing these chemicals into your body. And hey, chemicals are not necessarily bad things. I think that word has a negative charge, but it shouldn't. It just, your blood is a chemical, your saliva is a chemical, water is a chemical. They're all, so don't think of it as a bad thing. So how do we get these different chemicals to be released? So endorphins are released by exercise, especially if you increase your heartbeat. I don't know about you guys, but I know if I ever go on a run, I come back and I'm giggling and I'm laughing because, all these endorphins have been released. Serotonin, you go outside and you get sunshine and fresh air. If you spend your entire day inside in a dark space, you're going to be sad. But if you go outside and you get fresh air and sunshine, what happens is your body releases all the serotonin. Dopamine, if you achieve a goal, you receive praise, you do something you enjoy and deserve. So say somebody says, hey, Michael, you did an excellent job at that. Thank you for working so hard. Michael's getting a little burst of dopamine released. And the last one is kind of the love chemical and oxytocin. So you feel love towards someone or you feel that you are loved. And I know you guys all feel this from your own parents and others in your life. But, when you really have that moment where you feel oh gosh, my parent cares about me deeply, that the reason you feel happy about that is A, what they did, but B, your body's okay, we love this. This is great. And it releases this oxytocin, this happy chemical. Now drugs, right? So the sort of things we talk about and they're really terrible. They're dangerous because they interfere with the chemicals that help to make us happy. And we can become addicted to fake, unnatural versions of these happiness chemicals. And they can also damage the developing brain. So when somebody takes drugs, what they're doing is they're trying to get a whole bunch of this kind of chemical all at once, but in an unnatural way. So they're not getting it from the sunshine. they're getting it from this extra kind of substance, and it can really damage our bodies and damage our brains because they can become addictive. So you're going to be stuck to them, and you're like, oh, I always need more and more and more. So they're very dangerous things. Another way that we can kind of be happier is you can get enough sleep. So getting enough sleep can also help us to be happier. Sleep allows our bodies to regenerate. So that means remake, rebuild our cells, clear chemicals from our brain, and it supports our learning and memory. So most of you guys are 11, some of you guys are still 10, which is fine, but 11-year-olds need 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night. And I can tell you 10-year-olds need the same. So here's the deal. You need to be getting sleep every night, 8 to 10 hours, and if you're getting less, then it's going to actually make you less happy. And so it's something that's important to, prioritize and make it an important thing in your life. Go to bed when your parents tell you to. Another thing is that our brains have to make thousands of decisions each day. And this can really tire out our brains, and we end up using all of our brain power on making minor decisions. But if we make good habits, we have to make fewer small decisions per day. This allows us to focus on the more important, difficult decisions. Good habits help us to be happy, organized, and to do well. So if you have a habit of every day I'm going to brush my teeth in the morning and at night, well, then you don't have to think about it, and your brain doesn't have to worry about it because you know that's your habit, right? Or if you have a habit of every night before I go to bed, I'm going to say a prayer. Well, you know that every day that is going to be something that you do, and so it's a habit, so your brain doesn't have to tire itself out thinking about it. Or if you know that every time someone does something nice for you, you're going to say thank you, and that's your habit, you don't have to think about it, so your brain doesn't get tired out from having to think about that. That's one of the reasons, grade 5, that I love school uniforms, right? Because I don't want you wasting all your precious brain power on what should I wear today. I want you using it on, learning about Canadian history and how the brain works and all this kind of cool stuff. So habits are really important. Okay, this is the last video I'm going to show you, and then we have just like one more little section. And I think this is kind of a neat video from the CBC. Oh no, I need to kind of change how this goes. Okay.
It's no secret that children and teenagers are spending more time in front of screens than ever before. But new research suggests that spending less time outdoors is a big problem. This is part 2 of a CBC News special series called Rewiring Our Kids. Health reporter Pauline Dakin joins me live with the story. So, Pauline, what is nature deficit disorder? I can guess, but maybe you can explain it to me.
It's a term that was coined by the writer Richard Louv in his book, Last Child in the Woods. And basically, he's saying it's a side effect of the electronic age where people are spending, and kids in particular, spending too much time indoors on screens, not enough time out in the woods. And he says, there is a cost to that we don't do as well physically, mentally, or emotionally when we don't have regular exposure to nature. Now, there are a couple of schools of thoughts on why that is. The first is called the biophilia theory, and it says that we are meant to be in nature. Biologically, that is our natural habitat, and we don't do as well if we're not having exposure to that. The other theory says that when we're in nature, we pay a different kind of attention to what's around us, and it's different than when we're on a busy downtown street and watching the traffic and aware of what is going on around us. So this other kind of attention allows the brain to relax and kind of recover.
And so tell us a little bit more about the benefits of time spent in nature. And I think people in this country would really like to warm up so they could spend more time outside.
I hear you. But, it's nice out in the winter, too. Being in nature boosts the immune system. It lowers your blood pressure. It tamps down the stress hormones that your brain releases. It also acts as kind of a natural antidepressant. And there is research that shows that your attention and your memory gets a 20% boost by being being in nature. In some places in the world, being in nature is mandated for schools, in Finland, for example. And in Japan, there are, I think, several dozen sites where they do forest therapy and take people who have stress-related illnesses there for treatment. So clearly, it's a healthy thing to turn off the technology and spend some time out in the woods.
So if you look at that, you can see, this is why your teacher was so big on that native plant project, because, our brains have to take in this huge amount of information every day. And what we need is some time every day for some quiet and some calm, and we give our times to process the information overload. And that means, when you're not like at home, just like being on the computer or whatever, you can go outside, you can go on a walk on the beach, or you can go on a walk in your neighborhood or in the forest, that you don't need to have as much of your brain focused on hearing all these different loud sounds that are distracting and seeing all these different images in front of you. So when we have this kind of quiet, calm times, be it in a church, be it in a forest, anything like that, that our brains can pause, they can think more deeply, and they can heal. So grade 5, that's kind of our discussion today on, mental health and how your brain works and how your brain kind of is the way it is. I know it's been a long discussion, so I want to thank you for your hard work and your attention going through it. And I just encourage you today to take some time to have some quiet, to go pray, and make sure that if you haven't gone outside, that you go outside, get your parents to take you outside, go for a nice little walk, because it will really make you less stressed and less worried, and it's really good for you. Okay, thanks grade 5. Have a good night. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.